Hi everyone, this is Melissa Snark. I'm here today with you as part of the Wolfpack Conference. I'd like to thank Michelle Fox for inviting me to be a contributor. And I will be talking about writing the perfect blurb with my co-host Fiona Jade. The material you're going to see in this presentation was developed by myself, Fiona Jade, and urban fantasy author R.L. King. Now, R.L. King was unable to be with us here today, but please take a moment to check out her website. She's got some fantastic books. Now, writing the perfect blurb. It's been said that writing a 100-word blurb is harder than a 100,000-word novel. Please join us for an honest discussion of the fundamentals of how to write great back cover copy, as well as the mistakes some authors make. Now, if you're listening to this presentation, you're probably hoping to acquire some improvement in your blurb writing skills. Everybody hates them, but we've got to write them, right? Um, it would be wonderful if we could just go ahead and publish a book without them, but readers might be a little bit reluctant to purchase our books if they didn't know what they were about. Now I'm going to go ahead and try and give you a visual reference here to put with my voice. This is me. I am basically a very tired gray cat. Now let's go ahead and go to the next. This is actually me. This photo is taken on my honeymoon with my husband to France. There in the background is a river in France. It's 2008, and this is probably the last time that I was absolutely relaxed. I really like this photo. You can see I've kind of got the camera strapped there around my neck, and we were doing lots and lots of walking. My feet were very sore, but it was a very just wonderful experience. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about the workshop overview so you have an idea of what to expect. Writing the perfect blurb will be presented in two parts. I will be talking about the differences between a blurb and a synopsis, and I will present the starting questions handout. I will also talk about how to identify what the story is about with a focus on goals, motivations, and conflict. My co-presenter, Fiona Jade, will be coming on with part 2 of this presentation. She will cover the scorecard handout and how to go about rewriting a bad blurb. So who is this workshop for? It's for indie authors and self-published authors. Authors published with small and independent presses, small press editors, and indie press editors. Hopefully, at the end of this presentation, participants will have a takeaway of having the resources necessary to go home and write a new book blurb or revise an existing blurb. Now I'm going to go ahead and start by talking about the difference between a synopsis and a blurb. If you've been authoring for a while, you probably have heard both, but you might have a little bit of confusion about the differences between the two. So, what is a synopsis? A synopsis is defined as a brief or condensed statement giving a general view of some subject, or a brief summary of the plot of a novel, motion picture, play, etc. It's the second definition here that really applies to what we're discussing today and fits with our purposes. So the primary purpose of a synopsis is to summarize. They tend to be very cut and dried, and they're usually submitted to an agent or a publisher to give them an idea of what the entire story is about from beginning to end in a nutshell. They don't tend to be overly descriptive or have flourishes. You're basically hitting the plot points. Now, what is a blurb? A blurb is defined as a brief advertisement or announcement, especially a laudatory one, or a promotional description as found on the jackets of books. Again, it's the second definition that really fits better with what we're talking about here today. The primary purpose of that blurb is to entice readers to purchase your book. It's basically a selling tool or a sales pitch. Okay, so we have a couple blurb bullet points. The primary purpose of a blurb is to entice readers to purchase your book. Blurbs can be 200 words or less, 10 to be. You want your blurb to fit on the back cover of a paperback. For ebooks only, blurbs can be longer, but wordier isn't necessarily better. And again, blurbs are not the synopsis. Blurbs are book covers in words. So here's a caveat. The indie self-publishing definition of blurbs is different from that of traditional publishing. In trade pub, blurbing means that little quote that goes on the front of a book or the back cover that's by other authors who usually have some sort of name brand recognition. So suppose Michelle was to blurb my book and she would say, "Fantastic," in quotes, by Michelle, they'd say Michelle Fox underneath that. In indie and self-publishing, when we talk about the blurb, we're basically talking about the book description as seen on Amazon, and also the copy on the book, the paperback, when you flip it over, it's that little bit on the back that tells about what the book's about. So our purposes here today, we are talking about the indie self-publishing definition of blurbing. All right, here's an example of a blurb that almost everyone's probably familiar with at The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I'll go ahead and read this. In the ruins of a place once known as North America lies the nation of Panem, a shining capital surrounded by 12 outlying districts. The capital is harsh and cruel and keeps the districts in line by forcing them all to send one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 to participate in the annual Hunger Games, a fight to the death on live TV. And it goes on to talk about Katniss and her personal problems, and the goals, sets up her goals and the trials she'll face. So basically, here is the entire book in a few hundred words. Gives us the genre, the post-apocalyptic young adult novel. Gives us the setting. Gives us an idea of the conflict and who the characters are, and the trials they'll face. Now, do you have a current blurb, or are you starting from scratch? If you're starting from scratch, then you'd go to the starting question slide. If you have a current blurb, it's probably a good idea to review the starting questions, but you could proceed on directly to rewriting the blurb, which is the section of the presentation that Fiona Jade will be covering. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the starting questions. The first question is kind of a gimme unless you haven't titled your book yet. And it's, what is the title of the book? The next question would be, what genre does the book belong to? Now, this may require some independent research be conducted by the author. It is recommended that authors should familiarize themselves with their chosen genre. It may be that you have already identified your genre and written your book to market, you understand all the tropes and can already like list those and nail them spot on. But if you went ahead and wrote your book without having identified who your reader is in advance, then you should go ahead and try to familiarize yourself with the market and best identify which genre your book fits in best. It may be that you are a little bit cross genre, and that's okay. Some books are successfully marketed in more than one genre, but it is absolutely essential that as you're blurbing your book that you understand which genres you are targeting, because the reader needs to be able to read the blurb and tell what the genre is from that blurb, just like they're going to need to be able to look at your cover, and at a glance they should be able to tell what genre, what section of the bookstore your book belongs in. Okay. So next you want to list each primary point of view character, including their first and last names, their age, gender, profession, and any other important traits. Now, you're not going to necessarily include all that information in the blurb, but you should have a solid grasp of who that character is, and then you're going to pick or choose one or two relevant, really salient details that will grab the reader's imagination. Now, some stories only have one point of view character. That's again the character from whom the story's point of view unfolds from their perspective. And some stories that are written from multiple character points of view, such as the Game of Thrones series, there are a great many characters whose perspectives are represented in the story as it unfolds. All right. Now, what is the point of view of the book? Is it written in first person or third person? And what tense was the book written in? Basically, past or present? These things are important because they will influence the way in which you write your blurb. The point of view is basically the perspective a story is written from. There are three forms, which are first, second, and third. Now, blurbs can be written in past or present tense. In the past, many blurbs were written in past tense. However, the trend in most modern blurbs seems to be to write in present tense. Present tense conveys a sense of vitality and immediacy to the reader, and it also lends itself well to an economy of words. I think I want to pause here for a moment to reflect on. I personally believe that the point of view of the blurb should represent the story. So if you have a first person book, should have a first person blurb. However, there are authors who very successfully write third person blurbs for first person books. That's a choice that you would basically need to make at this point, and be ask yourself what best suits your story and how you can best present it in a way that's appealing to readers that will sell the book. And if you write a first person blurb and discover that it's not working for you, you can always go ahead and rewrite it in third person to see if that sounds better. So, what are the central themes of your book? A theme is the central idea in a piece of writing. Examples of themes might include revenge, hope, desperation, falling in love. A theme can influence your blurb and be represented in your blurb by your choice of language, the types of words that you use in the blurb. For instance, a tale of revenge might use words such as vengeance, bloodthirsty, getting even, just as a few examples. Okay, so we have starting questions. This is really where we dig into the meat of what the blurb is about. It's basically, what is the story about? What does each protagonist want, need? What stands in their way and prevents them from achieving their goals? And what is the central conflict in the story? Now, at some point, you're going to need to choose which protagonist to write the blurb, basically whose point of view you're writing the blurb from. Generally speaking, it's best to stick to one protagonist, except in instances of romance novels where you want to represent both partners, what they want, need, and their conflict, you know, with a focus on their romantic conflict. And I've heard it suggested that in most books outside of romance, you only want to name the main character or choose a main character to name in the blurb. However, again, in the case of romance novels, you want to go ahead and mention the primary partners by name. So let's go ahead and talk about what the story is about. So this is basically, what is the central conflict? Every story, regardless of genre, needs conflict. To write a good blurb, you need to identify the story's central conflict and pull the potential reader in with it. The primary purpose of your blurb isn't to tell your story, it's to make your readers want to open your book and read your story. All right, did that confuse you? Sorry about that. Then we have Captain Kirk down here looking kind of confused with those tribbles. We'll keep going here, and hopefully we'll be able to clarify this for you more. Now, what does the protagonist want, need? For the purposes of your blurb, you need to identify what your protagonist wants or needs most, which could be related to the central conflict. Okay, as I mentioned before, you should stick to a single protagonist, except in some genres like romance where you can include two. Don't include too many people in your blurb because readers can get confused. If you're talking about the heroine's brother, Dirk, it's not necessary to mention both his relationship to her and his first name. Just call him her brother for the purposes of the plot. I'm sorry, for the purposes of the blurb. All right, what stands in their way, or you can't always get what you want? Protagonists who get what they want right away make for bad books because the story is over. What is the main thing that stands in the protagonist's way? Why can't they get what they want? And what's stopping them or preventing them from achieving their goals? These are all questions you should ask yourself, and if either write down the answer, what you think is the answer, or have a good mental grasp of these things before you proceed with your blurb writing. I'd like to take a moment to recommend a book by Deborah Dixon called Goals, Motivation, and Conflict. It's the GMCs. It's a very useful book for achieving a solid understanding of those three things. So, what happens if the characters don't get what they want, basically? Okay, so you need to let the reader know what will happen if the protagonist doesn't get what they want. So they need to know what the stakes are. Ideally, they should be high. And not all stories have the fate of the world at stake, but they should all have serious consequences if the protagonist fails. All right, let's go ahead and break this down into a concise summary. The blurb in its simplest form is basically, what does the protagonist want? What stands in the way of this goal? And what happens if they fail? What are the stakes? Now, let's go ahead and talk about a common mistake that happens for many authors during blurb writing. Basically, be careful not to tell the reader everything that happens in the book. You don't want to give away the whole story. Pretend for a second that you're walking through Costco, and you know that lady who's handing out the sample, she has a piece of sausage or she's giving away a piece of cheese. She's not going to give you the entire package, she's just basically giving you a taste. And the goal of the store is that taste, that sample is going to be enough to entice you into purchasing, basically putting that, block of cheese in your cart or that package of sausage and wheeling it up to the cash register, paying for it, and taking it home with you because you want to consume the whole thing. You want more. So you want to be careful not to tell the reader everything. Otherwise, if you do that, then they don't have any reason to buy your book. So a blurb's only job is to grab the reader's attention, and it needs to do that in a very short time. All right, this basically concludes my half of the presentation. Fiona Jade's going to be along in a couple hours to present her half. Real quick, here's just a little bit about me. I'm a fantasy and romance author. I live in San Francisco Bay Area with my husband and 3 children and a whole bunch of cats. There's 4 of them. I really love Norse mythology, and I have a Norse mythology urban fantasy series, My Loki's Wolves World. You can see some of my covers down here at the bottom. If you'd like to visit my website, this presentation will be posted there, and I'll put a URL in the post in the work in the conference. You can also email me with questions at melissasnark@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions I can to try and clarify any of your concerns. And I will also be available um, in the conference post where the links to this will be found. Thank you so much for joining me today, and have a happy Friday and a great weekend.